If you learn how to give a powerful presentation, it is going to unlock untold opportunities for you. And I saw this when I faced one of my biggest presentations in my career, and that was when I did a TED Talk, which was ironically about the structure of great presentations. And with high stakes presentations, you only have one shot. You mess it up, and you're going to miss out on an opportunity that may only come once in a lifetime. And if I had failed to nail this talk about how to nail a talk, I would have proven my own framework wrong right in front of millions of people. But if I succeeded, Duarte would get so much press, so much credibility that would grow our company exponentially. So luckily, that was what happened. And in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how I did it so you can use the same framework to design your own viral presentation. What I discovered while preparing for that talk, which is inching toward 4 million views, it wasn't just another presentation template, it was a framework for capitalizing on high stakes moments. And what I found was that your high stakes presentations really come down to 3 specific moments. You do those well, and you're going to win over your audience and seize the opportunity in this video to nail your next high stakes presentation. What I share in my TED Talk is a presentation framework that I discovered after analyzing hundreds and hundreds of the most popular speeches and presentations of all time. Everyone from Martin Luther King with his I Have a Dream speech to Steve Jobs with his launch of the first iPhone. Now, the patterns were largely the same, and I actually even used that exact pattern when I delivered my own talk. And so the framework is an adaptation of the 3-act structure, which is one of the oldest and most tried and true story structures in history. And this framework also has worked wonders for hundreds of customers who went on to see incredibly successful product launches. It has helped get teams fully bought into new vision and directions from their CEOs, and it has scored multiple nine-figure contracts because of the power of the sales decks. And that's just the beginning. This framework is at the core of our entire business. And here's a quick look at what it is and why it works before I show you exactly how I used it in my TED Talk. The traditional 3-act structure divides a story into 3 parts or acts. You'll commonly hear them called the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. Act 1, the setup, it's where you introduce the hero, the villain, and the main conflict. It gives your audience the lay of the land, so to speak, so that they know who's who, what the setting and the rules are in this world that you've created. And it prepares them for this upcoming conflict that's going to happen in Act 2. So what I discovered is that in high stakes presentations, you need to focus on what is, or in other words, you need to focus on the status quo, but you need to do it in such a way that it sets you up for Act 2. So you need to paint a picture of what is, so that the middle of your presentation, there's a clear link for the audience that the current status quo is actually causing a conflict or a roadblock between them and what could be of what the future is that they want. So I'm going to dive into this more in a second. But the key part in any good keynote or pitch or product launch or anything is that you need to create the conflict early. Now, most presentations make a critical mistake in Act 1, and unfortunately, most of the time they actually don't realize that they're making it until after they present. They make themselves the hero of the story instead of their audience. Now, it's easy to do this accidentally because you're preparing a lot, you have to say a lot, and because you're putting so much work into it that you're trying to communicate ideas that you want your audience to buy into and to believe in. But the key is thinking through the problems, the pains, and the goals of your audience and basing your whole presentation around them. Again, I'll be showing you how I did this in my TED Talk here in a minute. But for now, let's move on to Act 2. It's in Act 2 that the confrontation happens. Now, this is all about contrast. You've spent your introduction building up this momentum, focusing on what is and the status quo. Now, you're going to contrast that with what could be. This is where you introduce more characters, more obstacles that they face, and things get quite a bit messier. And people often refer to this as the messy middle. Conflict creates intrigue because the audience wants to know how these characters that they've grown attached to are going to overcome circumstances that seem quite a bit dire with each passing second. So in presentations, this is where you create a bigger and bigger and bigger gap between where things currently are and where things could be in the future. And you want this gap to be as big as possible. And that's because what could be is tied to what you're presenting, whether it's a product, a new direction for your company, or a sales pitch. Now, this is often where your entire presentation can fall apart if you don't do a good enough job at creating the contrast between your vision and the status quo. By linking how your vision is going to help them get to the future they desire, I promise you your presentation will not inspire anyone to do anything. And I don't mean to sound harsh. I just want you to know the truth. This is where everything can fall apart. Now, most high-stakes presentations fall in this critical area in one of two main ways. They either focus way too heavily on data and statistics, making everyone's eyes glaze over because they are not drawn in with a story. Data and logic have their place, but they are only effective when strategically used inside of the story. You're not trying to convince a robot that your way is the most logical way. You are working with humans who've been drawn into story since the dawn of time. The other main way presenters fail to create contrast is by doing the typical sales pitch. Everything's amazing. We are the best. Nothing can go wrong. But humans are inherently risk averse. We are much more concerned about what we could lose versus what we could gain. So while we want to focus on the great things that are coming and the what could be, they won't mean anywhere near as much unless you contrast them with the real problems that people are facing right now. Now, these two scenarios boil down to not doing a proper job of creating meaningful contrast between what is and what could be. Magic happens when you paint a vision of what's possible. Acknowledge the real challenges, show them how your vision or your solution can help them overcome those challenges. And then Act 3 is where everything comes to a resolution. In the story, this is when the guy gets the girl, when peace is restored. Everyone lives happily ever after, but oftentimes an audience is left with themes or a big question to ponder. It's very similar with presentations, except we always want to end with a very clear call to action. In other words, based on everything that happened in the presentation they just heard, you have a decision to make. You either stay where you are in the status quo, or you do this specific action that's going to take you to this great future that holds out for you. And you just lay it all out really clearly. We want our audience to see the deep contrast between what is and what could be, and be left with a really clear choice. Your presentation should always come full circle. Starts with Act 1, and then Act 2 addresses their problems, needs, and goals, and then it ends with Act 3, showing them that there's a choice they get to make that's going to help them overcome problems and move toward their ideal future. Now, we have talked a lot about the theory, and I want to have you take a look at what this looks like in practice by analyzing my own TED Talk. So I'm about to play some clips for you. And as we do, I want you to think about the specific goal of each act, and more importantly, creating this gap between what is and what could be. This first clip is my introduction to my presentation, where I focus on connecting with the audience and setting the groundwork for what is.
You have the power to change the world. I'm not saying that to be cliche. You really have the power to change the world. Deep inside of you, every single one of you has the most powerful device known to man, and that's an idea.
My strategy here was to point out the limitless potential inside every member of the audience and create intrigue. I wanted to talk specifically about them and their potential because that gets them bought into the presentation and grabs their attention. If they can't quickly see the benefit of listening to you, then they will not listen anymore. It's just simply part of being human nature. We all naturally and subconsciously determine whether we want to listen to a presentation based on what we perceive the value will be to us. So if you talk about yourself or you don't connect with the audience immediately, you're likely to have already lost. You've lost their attention. So in this next clip, I begin laying the groundwork for what is. Pay close attention on how I connect this to the introduction.
So a single idea from the human mind, it can start a groundswell. It could be a flashpoint for a movement, and it can actually rewrite our future. But an idea is powerless if it stays inside of you. If you never pull that idea out for others to contend with, it will die with you. Now, maybe some of you guys have tried to convey your idea, and it wasn't adopted, it was rejected, and some other mediocre or average idea was adopted. And the only difference between those two is in the way it was communicated. Because if you communicate an idea in a way that resonates, change will happen, and you can change the world.
My goal here was to quickly establish the status quo that every person in the audience has the most powerful tool imaginable inside of them, an idea. But this incredibly powerful tool is ultimately worthless if it's not communicated effectively. And so I want them to sit with this problem as they begin building contrast about how ideas are worthless if they are not communicated effectively, and the idea of what could be if they had a framework for effectively communicating ideas. So in this next clip, I'm going to continue to dig in and describe the status quo, and often quickly compare it to what could be the future, where their ideas change the world because they've communicated clearly. I frequently jump back and forth between both states.
I really think they have the power to change the world when you communicate effectively through them. And changing the world is hard. It won't happen with just one person with one single idea. That idea has got to spread or it won't be effective. So it has to come out of you and out into the open for people to see. And the way that ideas are conveyed the most effectively is through story. You know, for thousands of years, illiterate generations would pass on their values and their culture from generation to generation, and they would stay intact. So there's something kind of magical about a story structure that makes it so that when it's assembled, it can be ingested and then recalled by the person who's receiving it. So basically, a story, you get a physical reaction. Your heart can race, your eyes can dilate. You could talk about, oh, I got a chill down my spine, or I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. We actually physically react when someone's telling us a story. So even though the stage is the same, a story can be told, but once a presentation's told, it completely flatlines. And I wanted to figure out why. Why is it that we physically sit with rapt attention during a story, but it just dies for a presentation? So I wanted to figure out, how do you incorporate story into presentations?
Notice how I continue to reference the concept of the status quo, where powerful ideas die when they're not effectively communicated. But then I start building the case for using stories in presentations, which is part of the what could be, or part of the solution that I wanted my audience to see. So we are now squarely in Act 2, and I have found that frequently switching between what is and what could be, what is, what could be, during the middle of your presentation, it's going to create a clearer and a bigger contrast between the two, which is ultimately what you want to see happen. So that's why I talked through the idea that stories have captivated us throughout history, but presentations generally don't have any sort of reaction to them. And then I begin telling the story of how I started the research journey. All of this is in the context of what is. The audience has great ideas, but they are worthless if they are communicated ineffectively. And what could be? I'm building the case for story as a method of achieving their desired future state of being a powerful presenter. So I will continue fleshing this out in the next clip, as unironically, I use a story to talk about how I discovered this powerful framework.
We've had thousands of presentations back at the shop, hundreds of thousands of presentations actually, so I knew the context of a really bad presentation. And I decided to study cinema and literature and really dig in and figure out what was going on and why it was broken. So I want to show you some of the findings that led up to what I think I've uncovered as a presentation form. So it was obvious to start with Aristotle. He had a 3-act structure, a beginning, a middle, and an end. We studied poetics and rhetoric, and a lot of presentations don't even have that in its most simple form. And then when I moved on to studying hero archetypes, I thought, oh, okay, the presenter's the hero, they're up on stage, they're the star of the show. And it's really easy to feel that way as the presenter, that you're the star of the show. Well, I realized right away that that's really broken, because I have an idea, I can put it out there, but if you guys don't grab that idea and hold it as dear, that idea goes nowhere and the world has never changed. So in reality, the presenter isn't the hero, the audience is the hero of our idea. So if you look at Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, just at the front part, there was some really interesting insights there. So there's this likable hero in an ordinary world, and they get this call to adventure. So the world is kind of brought out of balance. And at first they're resistant. They're like, I don't know if I want to jump into this. And then a mentor comes along and helps them move from their ordinary world into a special world. And that's the role of the presenter, is to be the mentor. You're not Luke Skywalker, you're Yoda. You're the one that actually helps the audience move from one thing and into your new special idea. And that's the power of story.
The goal here was to continue to flesh out my big idea that's going to help the audience reach their desired future state, where they are captivating presenters. My idea, though, isn't fully fleshed out yet because I have not revealed the actual framework that I've come away with after all this research. So I'm telling you the story instead of jumping right into the framework. That's so that I can build both intrigue, because the audience wants to know what I found, and I also continue switching back and forth between what is, which is ineffective presentations and great ideas, to what could be, which is great presentations and great ideas that are going to change the world. So in this next clip, I'm going to reveal the framework I developed, giving a lot of detail on how it came to be so that the audience could see its credibility and its effectiveness.
So we talk about shape. Story has an arc. Well, an arc is a shape. We talk about classical music having a shapeliness to it. So I thought, hey, if presentations had a shape, what would that shape be? And how do the greatest communicators use that shape, or do they use a shape? So I'll never forget, it was a Saturday morning. After all this study, it was a couple years of study, I drew a shape. And I was like, oh my gosh, if this shape is real, I should be able to take two completely different presentations and overlay it, and it should be true. So I took the obvious. I took Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and I took Steve Jobs' 2007 iPhone launch speech. I overlaid it over it, and it worked. I sat in my office just astounded. I actually cried a little because it was like, oh, I've been given this gift, and here it is. This is the shape of a great presentation. Isn't it amazing? It's crying. So I want to walk you through it because it's actually pretty astounding. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I want to walk you through it because the greatest communicators of all time, I went through speeches, everything. Actually, I can overlay the shape. Even the Gettysburg Address follows the shape. So at the beginning of any presentation, you need to establish what is. You know, here's the status quo, here's what's going on. And then you need to compare that to what could be. Now you need to make that gap as big as possible because there's the commonplace of the status quo, and you need to contrast that with the loftiness of your idea. So it's like, you know, here's the past, here's the present, but look at our future. Here's a problem, but look at that problem removed. Here's a roadblock. Let's annihilate the roadblocks. You need to really amplify that gap. This would be like the inciting incident in a movie. It's when suddenly the audience has to contend with what you just put out there, and they have to say, wow, do I want to agree with this and align with it or not? And then the rest of your presentation should support that.
At this point, I've given them the tool that I believe is going to help them go from their current state to their desired future state. In other words, this framework is going to help them effectively communicate their powerful ideas. Throughout the past few clips, I was trying to make the gap between those two states as big as possible, helping the audience to visualize what being in each state feels like and what that looks like. In this next clip, I add credibility to my idea, and I further drive home their desired future state by showing how some of the most influential presenters of all time followed the framework.
When I was done, I was like, you know what? I could use this as an analysis tool. I actually transcribed speeches, and I would actually map out how much they mapped to this tool. So I want to show you some of that today, and I want to start with the very two people that I used when I first did. Here's Mr. Jobs. Completely has changed the world of personal computing. He's changed the music industry. Now he's on his way to change the mobile device industry. So he's definitely changed the world. And this is the shape of his iPhone launch, 2007, when he launched his iPhone. It's a 90-minute talk. You can see he starts with what is, traverses back and forth, and ends with what could be. So I want to zoom in on this. The white line is him speaking. He's talking. The next color line you'll see popped up there, that's when he cuts to video. So he's adding some variety, and he cuts to demo. So it's not just him talking the whole time. And these lines are representative there. And then towards the end, you'll see a blue line, which will be the guest speaker. So this is where it gets kind of interesting. Every tick mark here is when he made them laugh. And every tick mark here is when he made them clap. They are so involved physically. They are physically reacting to what he is saying, which is actually fantastic, because then you know you have the audience like in your hand. So he kicks off what could be with this as a day I have been looking forward to for 2.5 years. So he's launching a product that he's known about already for a couple years. So this is not a new product to him. But look at this. He does this other thing. He marvels. He marvels at his own product. He marvels himself more than the audience laughs or claps. So he's like, isn't it awesome? Isn't this beautiful? And he's modeling for the audience what he wants them to feel. So he is actually doing a job of compelling them to feel a certain way. So he kicks off with what could be. With every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. So he starts to kick in and talk about his new product. Now, at the beginning of it, he actually keeps the phone off you'll see that the line is pretty white up until this point. So he goes off between, here's this new phone, and here's the sucky competitors, and here's this new phone, and here's the sucky competitors. And then, right about here, he has a star moment, and that's something we'll always remember. What he does, he turns the phone on. The audience sees scrolling for the first time, and you can hear the oxygen sucked out of the room. They gasped. You can actually hear it. So he creates a moment that they'll always remember. So if we move along this model, you can see the blue where the external speakers are going, and then over towards the bottom right, the line breaks. That's because his clicker broke. So what does he do? He wants to keep this heightened sense of excitement. He tells a personal story right there where the technology didn't work. So here's the master communicator, and he turns to story to keep the audience involved. So the top right, he ends with the new bliss. He leaves them with a promise that Apple will continue to build revolutionary new products. And he says, there's an old Wayne Gretzky quote that I love. I skate to where the puck is going to be, not to where it's been. We've always tried to do that at Apple from the very, very beginning, and we always will. So he ends with the new bliss.
Mapping this framework directly with Steve Jobs' first iPhone launch was incredibly powerful because it not only showed the power of the framework and how many people used it without maybe even knowing it, but it also further helped explain the tool that's going to help the audience move from their current state to their desired state. Just like Steve Jobs wanted to show his audience how the iPhone was going to change their life, I wanted to show how this presentation framework would change my audience's lives. In this final clip, I move into Act 3, and I give the audience a powerful call to action. After walking through how Martin Luther King used his framework in his I Have a Dream speech, but notice how it's only after I return to what is one last time.
So he's a great man. He had a big, big dream. There's a lot of people here. You guys have really big dreams. You have really big ideas inside of you that you need to get out. But you know what? We encounter hardships. It's not easy to change the world. It's a big job. His house was bombed. He was stabbed with a letter opener, ultimately lost his life, for what he cared about. But, a lot of us aren't going to be required to paint that kind of sacrifice. But what happens is it basically is a little bit like that basic story structure. Life can be like that, where, you guys are all likable people. You have a desire. You encounter roadblocks. And we stop there. We're just like, I had this idea, but I'm not going to put it out there. It's been rejected. We self-sabotage our own ideas, and we just butt up against the roadblocks instead of choosing to let the struggle transform us and choosing to go ahead and have a dream and make it real. And if anyone, if I can do this, anybody can do this. I was raised in an economically and emotionally starved environment. First time I got to go to camp with my sister, I was abused. It wasn't the first time I was abused, though. It was like just the most aggressive. And my mom and dad, they married each other 3 times. Yeah, that was tumultuous. And when they weren't fighting, they were helping sober up some alcoholic that was living with us because they were both sober alcoholics. So my mom abandoned us when I was 16 years old, and I took on the role of caretaker of my home and my siblings. And I met a man, fell in love. I went to a year of college. I did what every single bright young girl should do, because I got married when I was 18 years old. And you know what? I knew that I was born for more than this. Right at that point in the story of my life, I had a choice. I could let all these things push me down, and I could let all my ideas die inside of me. I could just say, life is too hard to change the world. It's just too tough. But I chose a different story for my life. Don't you know it? And so I feel like there's people in this room that you've got those little suavitos baking spices, and you're just like, it's really not that big a deal. It's really not the whole world I can change. But you can change your world. You can change your life. You can change the world that you have control on. You can change your sphere. And I want to encourage you to do that. Because you know what? The future isn't a place that we're going to go. It's a place that you get to create. I want to thank you.
Here I bring the presentation full circle by putting the emphasis back on the audience. I wanted them to know that they have a choice to make. They can choose to try to change the world by clearly communicating the ideas inside of them, or they can succumb to the fear that their ideas aren't that powerful, or that they don't have the tools to communicate them effectively. Wow. My goal here was to make them think, to give them a memorable moment that could serve as a catalyst for change. because whether or not they wanted to change, that was completely up to them. I can't make people change. I couldn't make them decide to start using this framework to communicate all of their ideas. It was ultimately up to each individual in the room, and they needed to know how big the stakes were. If they don't do anything and accepted the status quo, ideas that could change lives in their community could die. That's a sobering thought. So now you've seen exactly how I use this framework to create a TED Talk that reached millions. But more importantly, you have seen how this same structure can transform your high stakes presentations. So whether you're pitching that revolutionary new product to the board, or rolling out a new direction to your team, or trying to close that game-changing contract, remember 4 critical moments. First, make your audience the hero, not you. Next, show them that you understand their world before you try to change it. Then create that stark contrast between where they are and where they could be. And finally, give them a clear choice. Stay in the status quo or take specific action to reach that better future. Right now, you have a choice to make too. You can keep building presentations the same way, hoping that your ideas are going to speak for themselves, or can transform how you communicate in your biggest moments using this proven framework. And because here's the truth. Your next high-stakes presentation isn't just about the slides or the data or even your idea. It's about whether you can move people to action when it matters most. If you found this video helpful, please consider liking or subscribing to our channel. We're going to be posting a lot more detailed trainings like this one that you won't want to miss. We're on a mission to help you unlock the persuasive power of communication. Click the link or download a great guide that's going to help you get started. So I'll see you until next time.